The training field at Fort Hawthorne was a furnace, the midday sun baking the cracked earth until it shimmered with heat. A faint breeze carried the scent of gunpowder and sweat, but it did nothing to cool the sting of laughter that sliced through the air. It started as a low chuckle, a few recruits snickering behind their hands, but it grew bold and unrestrained, until the entire squad was roaring. They stood in a loose semicircle, their dusty boots scuffing the ground, pointing at the woman in front of them. She was coated in the same dirt they were, her uniform clinging to her frame, her face unreadable beneath the grime. Sergeant Elena Marquez, 34, stood motionless, her hands clasped behind her back, her dark eyes fixed on a point beyond the horizon. She just made a request that sent the recruits into hysterics. To qualify with the Viper's Fong, the elite rifle reserved for the base's legendary Nightshade unit. A voice from the crowd, sharp with mockery, cut through the laughter. "What's she gonna do, paint it glittery?" Another recruit chimed in, "Maybe she thinks it's a prop for a parade." The laughter swelled, but Elena didn't flinch. She didn't blink. Behind her, under the sagging canopy of the command tent, Colonel Marcus Reed watched, his weathered face betraying nothing but a faint tightening around his eyes. Elena Marquez was no stranger to being underestimated. At 5 feet 7 inches, with no medals pinned to her chest and no stories shouted from the rooftops, she was easy to overlook. But her silence hit a hurricane. She'd served 4 tours, 2 in the jagged mountains of Afghanistan, 1 in a classified operation in Syria, and another in a place the military didn't acknowledge existed. She'd navigated minefields under moonlight, her breath steady as she disarmed traps with hands that never shook. She'd carried a wounded teammate 3 miles through a sandstorm, her own shoulder dislocated, her vision blurred with blood and dust. When her squad's comms went dark during a botched mission in Mosul, it was Elena who rewired the system under fire, saving 12 lives. She never spoke of it. Not because she was humble, but because words couldn't carry the weight of what she'd seen. Her only visible scar was a thin, jagged line along her left jaw, earned when shrapnel tore through her helmet during an ambush. Her real scars, the ones no one saw, were buried deeper in the memory of holding her best friend, Private Aisha Cole, as she whispered her last words in a crumbling safehouse. Elena had promised to carry on. And she did, quietly, fiercely, taking a voluntary demotion to train recruits at Fort Hawthorne. She didn't care about glory. She cared about forging soldiers who could survive what she had. The recruits didn't know any of this. To them, she was just the sergeant who pushed them too hard, who didn't smile, who didn't banter. Her request for the Viper's Fong, a weapon so elite only 8 soldiers on base had ever qualified to wield it, was absurd to them. "She's dreaming," one recruit muttered, loud enough for the others to hear. "Maybe she wants a selfie with it," another added, sparking a fresh wave of laughter. Elena adjusted her stance, brushing the dust from her palms with deliberate care. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was a blade, honed and waiting. Colonel Reed stepped forward, his boots crunching the gravel, his shadow long and heavy across the field. The laughter died like a flame snuffed out. He held a clipboard, but his eyes were on Elena, studying her as if seeing her for the first time. "You think this is a joke?" he asked, his voice low, dangerous. No one answered. He turned to the armory officer, a wiry man named Lieutenant Hayes, and nodded. "Get her the Viper's Fong." The field went still, the air thick with anticipation. The armory officer returned, cradling the rifle like it was a relic. The Viper's Fong was a thing of lethal beauty, matte black, sleek, its lines sharp enough to cut the sunlight. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a test, a gauntlet only the best could run. Elena took it with steady hands, her fingers tracing the grip as if greeting an old friend. She checked the sight, adjusted the stock, and moved to the firing line. The recruits watched, their earlier mockery replaced by a tense curiosity. She didn't speak, didn't acknowledge their stares. Her first shot rang out, a crack that echoed across the field like a thunderclap. The target, 500 yards out, took the hit dead center. Another shot. Another perfect hit. Round after round, the Viper's Fong spoke for her, each bullet carving her story into the silence. The recruits' jaws dropped, their eyes wide. The one who'd made the glitter joke shifted uncomfortably, his face flushed. Another, a young private named Torres, whispered, "She's a machine. A damn ghost." Colonel Reed stood beside her, arms crossed, his gaze fixed on the shredded targets. "She doesn't need to talk," he said, his voice barely audible over the faint hum of the desert wind. "Her aim does that for her." When Elena lowered the rifle, the field was silent, the recruits standing straighter, their earlier laughter a bitter memory. She'd hit every target, Not a single miss, her movements fluid, precise, almost otherworldly. The armory officer, his skepticism gone, nodded in quiet respect. The recruits didn't cheer, they were too stunned for that, but their eyes followed her as she handed the rifle back, her face still unreadable, her silence louder than their earlier jeers. Later that day, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of fire, a recruit carved a phrase into the wooden bench by the range: "Silent steel cuts deepest." It wasn't just a tribute, it was a warning, a reminder that some warriors don't need to shout to be heard. Weeks later, Elena was tapped to lead a specialized training program for the Nightshade unit. The same recruits who'd laughed now stood at attention when she passed, not out of fear but out of something deeper: respect, hard-earned and unshakable. One of them, Private Torres, approached her after a drill, his voice low. "I'm sorry, Sergeant. I didn't know." Elena met his gaze, her eyes softening for the first time. "You don't need to know," she said. "You just need to learn." The story of that day spread through Fort Hawthorne like wildfire. Recruits whispered about the ghost of the Fong, the sergeant who turned laughter into awe with nothing but a rifle and her silence. Colonel Reed, in a rare moment of candor, added her name to the Nightshade roster, a decision that sent ripples through the base. The Viper's Fong wasn't just a weapon anymore. It was a symbol, a reminder that strength doesn't always roar. Elena's story didn't stop at the range. It reached the families of the recruits who heard it over late-night calls, and the veterans who nodded knowingly when they heard her name. A local journalist, tipped off by a recruit's post on X, wrote a piece that went viral, sparking a wave of support for women in combat roles. Donations poured in for a scholarship in Aisha Cole's name, ensuring her memory lived on in the soldiers Elena trained. But the real change was quieter, personal. The recruit who'd mocked the glittery rifle, Private Daniels, started staying late at the range, practicing until his hands bled, determined to prove he could match her precision. Colonel Reed, who'd seen countless soldiers come and go, began mentoring Elena, recognizing in her the kind of leader who could reshape the future. And Elena? She kept training, kept pushing, her silence still her shield, her scars still her story. She didn't need the world to see her. She needed the world to see what she stood for: discipline, honor, and the kind of courage that doesn't need a megaphone. This isn't just a story about a rifle or a range. It's about the warriors who fight battles no one sees, who carry scars no one notices, who win respect not with words but with action. Elena Marquez didn't need to shout to be heard. She let her bullets do the talking. If this story stirs something in you, don't let it fade. Share it. Tell someone about the sergeant who turned laughter into silence, who turned doubt into respect. Leave a comment. Where are you watching from? Subscribe for more stories about the quiet warriors among us, the ones who prove that strength doesn't always scream. Be the reason someone believes in the power of silence, in the fire that burns without a sound. Start today.